I can't overemphasize how important I think regionalism is, and maybe it'll help if I tell you how I got to it. I also worked for the state for many years. I worked for Bill Lockyer, who was responsible for the trail around the bay. So, I mean, I had a sense that this incredible area in which we live really needed to be pulled together in a way that made sense, and thought about that a lot. But when I was elected to the Board of Supervisors in 1988, one of my first assignments in 1989 was to be one of our representatives for Alameda County to ABAG. While I'd thought about land use planning and regionalism and a lot of those things, I was clearly thrown into the deep end of the water because ABAG was involved in Bay Vision 2020 at that time. What was the Bay Area region going to look like in the year 2020? There were enormous discussions, debates, fights, all kinds of various forums going on, and I became very much engaged in that. We have a region that is very diverse in terms of population and also in terms of lands and land uses. Rural, suburban, farmlands, vineyards, and then very urban centers. And how are we going to make all of that work? So Bay Vision 2020 showed me how important it was to look at the government job that I was in, that of being an Alameda County supervisor, from a regional perspective. Everybody didn't agree. The project had some momentum and flailed at times. I think it left some of us with some very good ideas, but moved into the next generation, which was the Alliance for Sustainable Development. By that time, I was a seasoned member of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors and a seasoned member of ABAG. During that time, I also became president of ABAG. And we looked then, once again, how are we going to preserve these resources, which were ever dwindling? Today, we find ourselves with even more dwindling resources, not only dollars, but land, all of the other resources that are vital to this area. And so having looked at the 3 E's, as we called them, equity in terms of people participation, the environment, which is so critical, and economic development, which keeps the engine rolling. That's the place where we were looking at the Alliance for Sustainable Development. So those kind of factors are what ABAG and regionalism means to me. As a member of MTC, I had the opportunity to participate in those same things, and now in the job I'm in now, going full circle, I'm working with MTC, jointly with ABAG and others in the region, to look at how we're going to make public transit sustainable. Clearly, a regional approach is the only approach in these various issues, and ABAG has been the leader in that regard. Well, the dollars come in a certain way, and MTC has the responsibility for sorting those out. Clearly, sometimes that's the only way you can bring people with diverse interests and from diverse jurisdictions to the table to look at their problems. So MTC plays a key role in bringing people together to look at how we're going to keep people moving throughout the region. And the fact that they are the entity that distributes the funds gives them a bit larger hammer than ABAG has. ABAG looks at the whole housing element and has to get people to decide where we're going to have people live and where we're going to have jobs located. But how we're going to move people around to those is critical, and MTC is in the center of that by its ability to fund and its ability to work with people to cooperatively decide who's going to do what in the areas of transportation, how we're going to interface, and how we can work collaboratively.
When you look at the accomplishments of ABAG in the last 50 years, what are some of the highlights that stand out in your mind?
Certainly those land use issues that we've talked about in the past are clearly, ABAG's been a front runner in terms of urban limit lines, economic development centers, making the 3 big cities work closely together to see what we can share and what we can work together on, and all of the other cities working together in the region. So that's been important. Some of the smaller projects that were there when I was president of ABAG are less visible projects. We're doing pooled finance. Smaller jurisdictions and nonprofits were not able to get public financing in the same way that do their bond financing in the same way that larger jurisdictions are able to do. ABAG formulated a finance pool so that we could make decisions about how people could fund projects and then back them up with the bonding necessary. So that was very essential. They also did a pooled electricity and energy project. That was essential. Many of these sort of entrepreneurial things that were done under the leadership of Gene Leong at that time, he was the executive director of ABAG when I was president, were very, very much in the forefront. And ABAG, I believe, continues to do those same things today.
Where do you think regionalism is headed here in our area?
It's hard to say, because it really does depend upon the political will of the folks that get elected and those who elect them. It's very hard to walk into people's backyards and tell them how they should be doing business. But from a regional perspective, we need to think beyond our own backyard. I have a funny story about when I was on ABAG, and I was also working on a land use plan. It really talked about where you should have viticulture and where you should have rural development and where you should have intensive infill and drawing an urban limit line. And we were doing this whole discussion at a regional level. And I said, God did not create cities, counties, or special districts, and so she won't mind if we redraw the lines. I got my first cartoon. It was in the Napa Registry with me sitting in front of a psychiatrist who was saying, "Yes, supervisor, and when did you develop this direct conversation with God?" I think they were trying to say I was a nutty lady. But now, in the year 2010, we really need to look even more carefully at the fact that we have to work together from a regional perspective in order to share the dwindling resources, both economically and in terms of natural resources, and in order to get people around in a way that is efficient and gives them a quality of life. So people come kicking and screaming. People always want to speak regionally and then vote locally. I think we've got a good group of elected officials now representing us in this region on ABAG and MTC, and if they can be disciplined with their colleagues and with their constituents, we can make the tough decisions that will mean we'll work collectively together in a regional fashion in order to get through these tough times and bring us into the next century in a better place. Well, certainly the bridge is an example of regionalism because you have the two major cities, Oakland and San Francisco, and this bridge is incredibly important to both. And then you have all of the other jurisdictions in the region where people travel that bridge and have to obviously be part of the financing vehicle that will pay for the bridge. So everybody had a keen interest. Then you just have the whole issue of the economy for the Bay Area, and the Bay Bridge almost being a symbol of the not only the splendor of the area, but its success in its vitality. It falls down in 1989. What a shock is that to the region? So it was important, I thought, and others, to pull together in a way that was not only symbolic but real in terms of bringing this bridge together with it back and bringing it with the imprint of the people who lived in this region. I went to MTC. I was a member of MTC, and I asked Steve Heminger, would there be a possibility of us having a contest to design a bridge that would reflect all of the elements of this incredible region, make people feel a part of it, bring people in so that they felt collaborative enough to help pay for it with higher tolls and all of the other things we've had to do, and also come up with something that was a beautiful and splendid project. I think we have that. Some people are critical that it took too many years to do, but it was an interesting process. Hopefully it will end up that everybody is happy with the product in the end and will feel that they had their voice in that project. Since this is, in fact, the free speech capital of the world, it got a little bit off track at a number of times, but it's a project that I feel glad to have participated in, even if it didn't happen as quickly as it should have. What did happen was there was a collaborative effort. There was discussions that needed to occur. There were relationships formulated that will go well into the future. And when we open it, we'll all breathe a sigh of relief. I might say the committee that helped facilitate it and maybe slowed it down a bit was the Bay Bridge Design Task Force. And it was made up of local elected officials, representatives from ABAG, engineers, and Caltrans representatives, I developed an excellent relationship with Caltrans at that time, and Caltrans takes the brunt of a lot of the jokes and bad publicity and had in the past. I think their work on this project and others has proven them to be a stalwart organization, and they've worked with us regionally very well also.
Are there sort of highlights in ABAG's last 50 years that sort of spring to mind as accomplishments that the whole region should be proud of?
Well, just the moves towards how they do land use and planning. The whole issue of building housing that's close to currently existing infrastructure, the combination of mixed-use housing for those who can't afford the most expensive house, for those who would like to move back to the intercities, making it transit-oriented development. All of that is really the grandchild of ABAG's thoughts when they planned Bay Vision 2020, when they moved into the Alliance for Sustainable Development, and then their whole land use planning elements that they've put in place. So I think that the most visible things that we see are those that I think the region can be grateful for. And when you drive past a BART station and you see housing around that BART station, and you see buses running frequently by the BART station, and you see the ability for kids and seniors to have pedestrian-friendly walkways, all of that would not have been possible without the vision of ABAG in conjunction with MTC to look at regional planning, where people need to get, where people need to live, how they can do that in the best quality available. And the planning that was done through MTC and ABAG really is what makes these projects possible, and they'll sustain themselves into the future.
I mean, we talk theoretically about ABAG especially having that kind of vision and foresight, 40, 50 years ago. People don't really understand what 40, 50 years ago was, 1960. I mean, sustainability was not even really on the radar at that point, nor was regionalism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that when ABAG started, it clearly had an approach that and a take on what was happening in the future that was not held by the larger population. Everybody was into my backyard, a large one at that, as much property around my house as possible, and my big car. And not in a negative sense. That was just what we were used to and what we thought we were going to be able to expect. Reuven Tranter was a visionary. Reuven Tranter was the ABAG general manager at the time, executive director at the time that I learned about ABAG in the beginning before I even became a member. And he was really a visionary in many ways, bringing together Dick Spees. I want to mention Dick Spees. Dick Spees from the city of Oakland. Dick Spees is the gentleman who made me become president of ABAG. I said, I do not have time to really become the leader of an organization that is doing so much when I'm trying to run an agency like Alameda County, which has its own problems. And he said, Mary, this is important. This is important. Dick was a regional thinker. Dick, who was a Republican in a county which is generally held by Democrats, was able to work cooperatively across party lines with Washington, D.C. to look for rules and regulations that would make sense to plan from a regional perspective, to work with local elected officials. So the fact that it came about so early is amazing to me when I look back at it. Now we would think, of course you would think regionally. Now it's like you wouldn't think of smoking on an airplane or in a theater. You wouldn't even think of that. You wouldn't think of not planning regionally because of the foresight of ABAG. There's been a huge cultural shift. A lot of it was the result of necessity, but it had to take somebody who was thinking very much progressively to know that necessity would come about. As I said, I think some of us have thought in the 60s that, we were going to be a country of unlimited resources, a country of unlimited. We're the wild, wild west. We could drive, walk, plant our house wherever we wanted to. And the truth of the matter is we have a large population growth, which is a good thing. That's responsible for the economy being strong when it is strong, and we need to maintain that. And in order to do that, it requires regional planning. ABAG was way ahead of that, and thank God somebody put it in somebody's mind to think about it. ABAG and MTC have always kind of worked on similar tracks, going in the same direction, but not necessarily interfacing all the time. And so them being together meant that there was always some cross-fertilization in terms of the discussion between ABAG and MTC. But I've watched it grow even closer over the years, and now to this committee that's for specifically to find a way to make public transit sustainable, which is essential in this region. ABAG being at the table is very important. Ezra Rapport is at that table now. Pat Jones has attended those meetings. Henry Gardner was in the forefront. I should mention Henry, because Henry has been an incredible leader also in terms of not only his leadership at ABAG, but he's another one, sort of like myself, who's been in various places in this whole regional picture with regard to our professional jobs, and yet come together and seeing that ultimately our sort of final jobs are very much involved in looking at government from a regional perspective. The whole thing about sustainable transit, it won't work unless you do planning and have the cities and the local jurisdictions in sync with how you're going to plan in order to make sure that transit works. Since there's not an unlimited amount of fuel, since we're all trying to reduce our carbon footprint, those elements working together are even more critical. And I think on this final project, I see ABAG and NPC coming together in a way that makes real sense. In the future, I would expect them to come together even more closely. The next generation of what ABAG and MTC might be is something that I think we all look forward to seeing.
What do you think some of the biggest accomplishments of MTC have been over the years?
When we talk about accomplishments, with MTC, it's sort of like, are the buses and trains running, and are the bridges standing up and being built, and are the taxpayers' dollars going in the right place with regard to public transportation? The fact that this Bay Area region works as well as it does in terms of getting folks around, and it still does work a lot better than other dense regions in the country and in the state, is a tribute to MTC's planning. Specific projects, obviously I look to the Bay Bridge, their extreme efforts there. They're all of the roads, and they've been a long time looking at what's happening at the Caldecott Tunnel, and now we've gotten the dollars to get that underway, and that will solve a big problem in terms of what's going on there. Those are immediate ones that kind of jump to mind. I'm sure there are huger projects in which they've been involved in, and ones that might be more visible to others. From my perspective, it's just been kind of the whole way that the Bay Area is able to move and continue to move in spite of the crises and the difficulties. MTC was clearly involved when, as I said, when the earthquake occurred, when all of the tragedies have occurred around here, to make sure that dollars got moved into the right places to make the repairs in a timely fashion. They deserve a great deal of credit for that. I can't think of anything that I really want to add. I guess, if you get to a place in this film where somebody gets to say that they want to thank all of the parents of ABAG and MTC, all of the people who over the last 40 and 50 years brought us in this region an incredible planning vehicle, an incredible transportation planning vehicle. We need to thank them. Numbers of politicians, elected officials who have put their names on the line, who have fought with their constituents in order to think regionally and vote regionally. A great deal of thanks needs to go to them, as well as the fathers of MTC and ABAG, who had the foresight to think regionally before most people did.